Hello and welcome back. sleepywhatsit here with another miniatures video for you. In today's video we're going to be doing another paint along, this time a tutorial for beginners for painting Blood Angel Space Marines. So this is a continuation of a series that I have going where I'm painting all the main Loyalist Space Marine schemes in a beginner accessible way. I've previously covered Ultramarines, Space Wolves, and Deathwatch, which I'll put links down below if you want to check those out. As with the previous videos in this series, it's going to be divided into two sections. First, a walkthrough of a very beginner-friendly tabletop paint scheme that uses a minimal number of paints in its palette and a restricted set of skills. And then a second part where I'm going to expand the palette and the skills we're using to demonstrate how you can improve this paint scheme and take it up to the next level. If you've not seen one of my paint-along videos before, I use markers like what will immediately follow to indicate when you should pause the video and complete the described steps. I am going to assume that you've assembled your model and primed it already. If you need help with how to do this, I have other videos that cover this that I'm going to put a card up for and links down below so you can go check them out. And with all that out of the way, let's actually get into painting. For this painting scheme, I'm going to, as always, start off with a black primer base. If you're painting a bunch of Blood Angels at once, I would suggest considering investing in a red primer spray from either from GW, Army Painter, or Vallejo, so that you can prime and base coat in a single step. If you're starting with a non-red primer, then you're going to want to base coat the entire model using Mephiston Red. Remember to thin your paint enough that it should require 2 thin coats to get full coverage. This will help us avoid filling in the details too much and ending up with a thick, chunky paint job. Since the armor is going to be primarily red, we're going to be painting the entire model in the armor scheme, and then we'll go and kind of layer details on top of it. After painting out our base coat red, we're going to want to shade the entire model to deepen and define some of the recesses. This is going to be done with Agrax Earthshade, which is an umber brown wash from GW. Make sure to use an unloaded brush to remove any shade that starts pooling out in flat areas. Like, this should be staining it, not like completely coating it. It'll take like about 15 minutes or so for the shade to dry. Make sure that it's completely dried before you proceed to the next step, because otherwise you're going to start pulling up paint. Once the paint shade is dried, we're going to brighten up the model by dry brushing using our base color, Mephiston Red. You're just going to want to get a little bit on your brush, wipe it off on a towel until just a little bit is showing up, and then lightly tickle the model, dry brushing it up and down to hit the high areas and bring back some of the color. We're not trying to establish a light direction at the moment. We're just kind of trying to re-brighten everything. Don't be pressing so hard when you dry brush that you're getting down into the recesses, because we do still want that shade to shadow things. So it takes some time to get the feel for this. If you do fill in any of the shadows significantly, you can use your shade to touch it up, though again, you'll have to let it dry again. For our second highlight, to establish a light direction on the model and increase the contrast even more, we're going to be dry brushing again, but this time using Evil Sunz Scarlet. Since we're attempting to establish directionality, and this is the second highlight, you want to go a little bit lighter than you went with the first layer. So a little bit less brushing, and also focus on only contacting the model when you're stroking downwards. So it's only the top edges and sides of elements that are receiving the paint, so you're not getting any of it on the underside. And this will help kind of establish that the light is coming from above. If you don't have Evil Sunz Scarlet, you could just leave it with a single highlight of Mephiston Red. That would be fine for a tabletop quality. If you want to kind of mix up your own from your existing paints, I wouldn't use white for adjusting the red, because though that will get a bit lighter, it's going to push it more into the pink end of the spectrum, and that's not really the color that we're looking for here. You're wanting a more orangey red for highlighting, so you could mix in like a little bit of yellow into your red to brighten it up for a second highlight, or like if you're looking for an alternative paint, that's what you're looking for. With all this highlighting done, we basically have the power armor completed. You should pause the video now and go paint the armor on your Blood Angel. After painting the armor, we're going to have to start detailing the rest of the paint scheme. To begin this, we're going to paint all of the black elements using Abaddon Black. This is going to be areas like the aquila on the chest, the body of the bolter, the backside of the joints, like on the elbows and knees, and the right knee pad, which are going to end up being finished in black. Additionally, elements that are going to be painted with metallics, like the vents on the backpack, and the pipes on the helmet, and some of the elements of like the bolter and such also need to be painted black. You should pause the video now and paint all the black elements of your model. After completing the black elements, we're going to finish off all the matte details before we go on to the metallics. For the belts and pouches, I used Rhinox Hide to give them a nice deep brown color. For the wax on the purity seal, I used Screamer Pink to distinguish it from the red of the armor, though if you're trying to limit the number of paints that you're using, or you don't have Screamer Pink, just leaving it red, like Mephiston Red, is totally fine. Basically, for any other Space Marine, it would look totally natural. For the paper on the purity seal, I used Rakarth Flesh as a base coat for it. For the helmet, to make the lenses pop a little bit and be more distinguishable, I used Warpstone Green to fill them in, though you could just leave them shaded and it would be totally fine. You should pause the video now and paint the matte details of your model. The remaining details that we need to base coat are all the metallic elements at this point. For our gray/steel colored elements, like the details on the bolter and the vents on the backpack and the pipe on the helmet, we're going to be using Leadbelcher, which is a dark gray metallic from GW. There isn't much gold on this model, but there is an aquila on the bolter that we're going to paint gold, which we're going to base out using Retributor Gold. Though, honestly, if you wanted to just base that out using the Leadbelcher because you don't have Retributor Gold, it would be totally fine. Once these details have dried, we're going to shade all the metallics and the matte ones that we've just done using Agrax Earthshade, and then you need to let it dry before we continue. You should pause the video now and go finish up the details on your model. Once all the shade is dried, we're going to need to brighten up the details again using our original base color. This is going to be probably done using layering as opposed to dry brushing, so you're going to want to use your standard brush, thin your paint down, and just kind of touch the raised elements of it. That would be catching light and not going down in the shadow. So you're just kind of trying to take where it's already not like super dark and pushing them up to increase the contrast. Now that we have the beginner's paint job completed, let's go through a few additional steps that we can take to push this paint job up a notch or two. To begin with, we're going to push the highlights even further by applying a second thinner highlight to most of the model, similar to how the armor had the Evil Sunz Scarlet highlight, though actually for the red on the armor, we're actually going to be doing a third highlight. This is going to be done using Wild Rider Red, which is a pretty orangey red color. Since this is our third highlight, as mentioned, this highlight's actually going to have to be pretty thin, and it's not going to be dry brushed, so we're going to be doing kind of like a layering edge highlighting thing. You're only going to want to highlight basically the hard edges of the armor, so none of like the smooth, large panels, but basically anywhere there's like a sharp right angle, like on flanges, on knee pads, and like on the polcher and such. Just catch those edges and make them pop even a little bit more, because you're just wanting to make the shape of the model a little bit clearer. For the black elements like the bolter body and the chest aquila, we're going to want to highlight them using Eshin Grey. Again, we're just trying to get a highlight here so that the shape becomes more visibly apparent to someone looking at it. For the metallic areas, we're going to highlight using Runefang Steel on the gray metallic areas and Auric Armor Gold on the yellow metallic areas if you did those. I didn't go and do additional highlights for things like the purity seal, the belts, and the lenses, since they're quite small secondary elements that for a tabletop quality paint job are not really worth the effort, and I don't want to really draw attention to them as much. So that's kind of why I didn't go in there and highlight them. You should pause the video now and go apply some additional highlights to your model. Since we pushed up the bright portions of the model using highlights, to further increase the contrast, we're going to now have to deepen the darker elements. This is going to be done using basically standard lining techniques. So you're going to want to use black wash or ink like Nuln Oil or an umber brown like Agrax Earthshade for this. Using a detailing brush, you just want to run a thin line along anywhere the two colors meet, though there aren't that many on this model, but basically so that they are more distinct instead of muddling together. Also, we're going to follow along any of the shadows the shading created, and in the deep sections, darken them or take out any highlighting that's gone in there. Anything that's like an underside element, like especially under hard edges, where you may have placed a highlight on the top side of it, you're going to want to run a bit of this lining in there just to darken it out. And like any panel lines on the model, just run a little bit of this through there just to make them really clear and pop out. You should pause the video now and go do some lining on your model. With the highlights and shadows pushed a bit further, we've taken our contrast up a notch, so we only have really one final step to complete this paint job, and that is applying transfers to indicate things like chapter, roll, etc. for the model. Since this model is rather monochromatic, these details really do help pull them all together and make it stand out and feel finished. You can freehand these if you desire, but I find transfers make things go a lot quicker. I have a video with a section on a more detailed explanation on how to apply transfers, which I'll link, but the basic process is varnish the area that you're going to apply to, cut out the transfer, wet the transfer, place the transfer, and once the transfer is dried, apply varnish to seal it to make sure that it doesn't get damaged. The specific elements that I applied are the Blood Angel's crest to the left shoulder for the chapter, a yellow teardrop on the right shoulder to indicate that it's the second company, and I added a skull to the blackened knee pad to indicate that's first squad. My choice for specific company and squad was mostly based on the transfers I had available and what I thought was aesthetically pleasing. With all that done, we now have our completed Blood Angel ready to be deployed on the tabletop. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video informative. If you did, please give the video a like. If you want to see more videos like this about painting, miniatures, and such, please subscribe to the channel. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.